Okay, hi there. We are talking about perfectionism in this video. Maybe you know a perfectionist, maybe you are a perfectionist, but I contrast perfectionism with moderation, as in like the proverb that says, let your moderation be made known to everybody. And most people, I know I had done this, kind of assumed that moderation was referring to drinking. You know, don't get drunk, don't get hammered, lit, sort of 2 glasses of wine or beer or whatever is just enough. But I've come to understand over the years that moderation really refers to being in balance. It has to do with finding a balance in all these areas of life, whether it's balancing family and work, even in drinking, of course, it applies to that. But if you're a writer, in your writing, about finding balance, about finding the stopping points where enough is enough. So, perfectionism has in it this idea that you've got to get things better, better, better. More right, more right, more right. A perfectionist typically has as his or her motto, I'm not trying to get it perfect, I'm just trying to get it right. And if you stop and think about it, you realize there is no difference between those two statements. And so, a perfectionist, for instance, just so you understand where I'm coming from in a sense on this, somebody can look at a forest of 100 trees, and there could be 1 or 2 trees that are in bad shape somewhere in that forest. And most people would say, wow, they would see this forest and say, that's really beautiful. A perfectionist, on the other hand, would look and see the 1 or 2 trees that aren't doing well and focus on those. And there needs to be a better balance struck in life. I suppose if you had 20 bad trees in that forest, you could say, all right, whatever, but perfectionists really do focus on the things that could be done better. And that's what we're looking at here. It's a very high ideal that perfectionists have, sometimes for themselves, frequently for other people as well. So Anne Lamott got me really thinking about this. Anne Lamott is a writer she's brilliant. She's one of my favorite authors. I've been reading her stuff for 8 or 10 years now. The first book I read of hers was Bird by Bird, Some Instructions on Writing and Life. And it was a book on writing, as the title suggests, or the subtitle does. But it wasn't about syntax or grammar or plot points or structure or how to move the plot along. What she spoke about was how real life issues will impact your writing. And she had a chapter in there, it was early on in the book too, on perfectionism. And I'm going to read the way it started because this was so gripping to me. And she said this, I'm reading here. Perfectionism is the voice of the oppressor, the enemy of the people. It will keep you cramped and insane your whole life, and it is the main obstacle between you and a shitty first draft. I think perfectionism is based on the obsessive belief that if you run carefully enough, hitting each stepping stone just right, you won't have to die. The truth is that you will die anyway, and that a lot of people who aren't even looking at their feet are going to do a whole lot better than you and have a whole lot more fun while they're doing it. End quote. And that stopped me in my tracks, as Anne frequently does in her writing, because she's brilliant, self-effacing, and all that. So there's my plug for Anne, even though I've never met her. The notion that we don't have to die. everybody wrestles with the idea that one day we're going to die. In part, that's why the Bible, various elements of the Bible started to make a lot more sense to me and why I followed it. Inform me on how I could live my life better now. And part of that is to be in balance, to not fear death as much. We all fear it because we're not made to comprehend death. How do you even comprehend it? Once you experience it, what do you do with it? Because you're dead. Anyway, perfectionism, though, is a form of greed. Because greed is the notion, we tend to think of greed in terms of money, which is common. And greed, though, says it's not enough. It's not enough. I got to have more. And perfectionism does the very same thing. We've got to get it more right. And where perfectionism hurts people is in social settings. It doesn't hurt you if you're a surgeon, like in your professional world. That actually most people are comforted by the fact that you might be a disaster socially, but if you're going in for surgery, you want that surgeon to have it just right. Or when you get on that airplane, you want to know that the engineers took it to the nth degree so that those wings hold the fuel and there's no structural fatigue, all these kinds of things. But in the broader context of life, whether it's in a family setting, a friend, a circle of friends, within a church setting, and you're bringing together multiple personalities, perfectionism tends to drive a wedge between people. And it's frequently unintended, but I analogize it to the concept of pi, P-I, that we learn in geometry in American schools anyway. And pi was the circumference of a circle. The number that we assigned was 3.14. All right, and that's an imprecise number, but 3.14 was the operative number to help you find, the circumference of a circle. If you knew the diameter, if you knew the radius, you could figure out the area of a circle. But 3.14 continues on. Mathematicians, certainly with the help of computers, have taken the decimal point out much further. 3.1416 are the first four numbers, but it goes on for millions of numbers, however they calculate this. And that's the way I see perfectionism playing out. And in theological circles, one of the ways that we can become really rude is by thinking that based on years of study and concordances and looking at the Hebrew and the Greek and all these doctrines and opinions that we formulated, that we've got the right opinion now, or the better opinion than someone else. And I just bring this up because I know a lot of perfectionists. I've at times been one. When I'm working on a project, I remember one in particular back at school at Rutgers where I was the head of a group of people, of students, in a very large class, and we had to give a presentation. And I had so much work to do. It was my senior year. I had so much other work to do to get done that I didn't want to wait for them to figure things out. So I kind of steamrolled them. And that's my moment when I reflect back on where I was somewhat perfectionistic. I was highly impatient. I was intolerant of them not knowing the subject matter. And, we got an A on the class presentation that we had to give. But, we would have probably gotten an A anyway. And the A just validated me in the moment that I did it correctly. But I really didn't. Socially, I think people still liked me, but we're like, good God, is he always like this? And the answer is no, I'm really not. And I certainly learned from that not to always be like that. There's a lot of pressure to be like that. And when you find a sense of balance in life, you'll find that people receive you better. You'll find that you're actually more at peace with yourself. Because if, as Anne said, the driving force behind perfectionism is to get everything in this life just right and hitting those stepping stones just right. And then in that way, maybe you think you could stave off death. Well, you can't. And you really can have a lot more fun and get more done, certainly with other people, and even have a sense of peace, because greed in the financial sense doesn't engender peace, and perfectionism in the personal sense also doesn't engender peace. It doesn't allow for peace, because you're saying more, better, more, better, more, better. Got to keep getting things, moving it further out to get it just right, more and more refined. So with those there, it can be harder for a perfectionist or a control freak, we like that phrase sometimes, to be understood, because the sands under them are constantly shifting, or they're shifting the sands, trying to get things more and more right. They're sort of not stopping with where they're at. And even though there is a way to strive to get more knowledgeable about your given field, or get more fill in the gaps of your understanding that you don't know, whether you're building a website or learning photography, all these things I had to build a website and the channels. Even still, there's a way of going about it to where you say, okay, I know enough, and I don't need to drive myself nuts to figure more out. I can work with what I have. So it can be harder for a perfectionist or a control freak to be understood, because the sands are always shifting, because they're looking to move things further and further and further to getting them more right. And so the sands are shifting. But, maybe that's the point for some, which is to keep shifting the sands so that we don't have to stop and see what life really is. In fundamentalist organizations, religious organizations, I see fundamentalism as a form of theological greed. I see it as people telling others, this is right, this is right, this is right. And I even see it done within the group itself, where those who have been in the group longer are telling the ones who are younger within it, they sort of dismiss them because they don't know as much as they do. And that to me is just greed, along the lines of when a wealthy person looks at a poor person and says, you're really not worth my time because you're not in my socioeconomic class. And moderation bridges the gap there. Anybody in any class can be moderate or in balance enough to connect with other people. So in practical terms, perfectionists are not peacemakers. They have a hard time bridging the gap and seeing other perspectives, because generally there is a belief, this is my observation now, that perfectionists have this idea that because they've thought things through so far that they're right. And that approach sort of prevents them from being a peacemaker or a mediator, because they're not real good at seeing multiple sides of an issue. Whereas somebody who is in balance can see multiple sides of issues and work with them and see the good parts to each of them. And, those tend to be like the peacemaking type people. So there's a practical benefit to being in balance, and there's a harm to not. So now here's another thing I'll touch on, which is Kevin Leman did a work called the Birth Order book 30 years ago or so, which I was determined to ignore, and I successfully ignored it for 10 years or so. But then I picked it up and I started to look at it, and what he had to say was somewhat of a resurrection of an earlier psychologist's work, probably a German, but I don't remember who that was. And then he expounded upon it through other studies. And the premise of the Birth Order book, and looking at where you are in the birth order in your family, whether you're the firstborn, secondborn, third, fourth, or an only, and which gender you are, all of that, this field research suggests that firstborns look at their parents for how to do things, right? Because they're the only other ones in the family. The secondborn looks at the firstborn. They identify more with that one. The thirdborn looks at the two above them, and so forth. So when you're a firstborn, your parents are doing things so much better than you in your mind. And they probably are. In a lot of things, they are. They just know how to do things. They know how to drive. They know how to do a lot of things that you, as a 3 and a 5 and a 9-year-old, don't know how to do. And they make the rules. So you tend to be more rules-oriented as a firstborn, and an only child qualifies as that. And perfectionism tends to reside in firstborns and onlys. And part of the argument is that their birth order kind of determined that that's the way they were going to go. The secondborn looks at the firstborn, and, they're two kids, and kids only do things so well until the secondborn, and I'm simplifying this, but the general premise is there that a kid doesn't do things as well, and so you tend not to be perfectionistic if you come after that one. Got it? So for you to just contemplate this, the French have an expression that covers, in my estimation, the deceptiveness of perfectionism. And I didn't study French, but I'm going to say it in my best French. And the expression is, le mieux est souvent l'ennemi du bien. Or du bien. Which means the perfect is the enemy of the good. And in life, 3.14 is good enough. It was good enough in our geometry test as the operative number. And that should be our social balance. That should be what helps keep us in balance. And rather than, more. And if you're going to strive for things, that's okay. If you want to get things more refined, that's good. But this should help you be aware of the pitfalls that you can fall into. And this is very generalized. It's a brief video, but it does draw your attention to some aspects of perfectionism and the benefits of being in balance. Moderation is appealing, and it really is, it's a pleasant feeling to have it once you've got it, because you're not always uptight. So there's a little bit on perfectionism, if you are a perfectionist. If you're a perfectionist at work, if you're a ballet dancer, you've got to get your choreography and your transitions and your positions and everything like that just right, your costuming. If you're a surgeon, you've got to use the right tools and the right sutures and the techniques and all of that just right. You're very much appreciated in studying your craft and getting it right and applying yourself. But in relationships with other people, don't insist that your way is right. I won't insist that my way is right. And that will help us respect one another, because we each have unique functions. An elbow is different than a forearm. And for a forearm to tell an elbow what to do is just inappropriate. You could suggest things perhaps, but we're better off learning from the others. A foot, metaphorically speaking, would do well to understand what a shoulder goes through, or a hand, and vice versa, rather than telling them how to do their job or how to be. And in this way, we can just get along better. I mean, there's a whole lot more peace within a family, within any social group, if each of us is in balance. And if none of you is in balance, you can be the first to start. If you're all perfectionists, you can start. Okay? So there you go. I wish you well in your pursuit of being in balance. It's a lifelong endeavor.